My Religion by Leo Tolstoy. Introduction. I have not always been possessed of the religious ideas set forth in this book. For 35 years of my life, I was, in the proper acceptation of the word, a nihilist, not a revolutionary socialist, but a man who believed in nothing. 5 years ago, faith came to me. I believed in the doctrine of Jesus, and my whole life underwent a sudden transformation. What I had once wished for, I wished for no longer, and I began to desire what I had never desired before. What had once appeared to me right now became wrong, and the wrong of the past I beheld as right. My condition was like that of a man who goes forth upon some errand, and having traversed a portion of the road, decides that the matter is of no importance, and turns back. What was at first on his right hand is now on his left, and what was at his left hand is now on his right. Instead of going away from his abode, he desires to get back to it as soon as possible. My life and my desires were completely changed, good and evil interchanged meanings. Why so? Because I understood the doctrine of Jesus in a different way from that in which I had understood it before. It is not my purpose to expound the doctrine of Jesus. I wish only to tell how it was that I came to understand what there is in this doctrine that is simple, clear, evident, indisputable. How I understand that part of it which appeals to all men, and how this understanding refreshed my soul and gave me happiness and peace. I do not intend to comment on the doctrine of Jesus. I desire only that all comment shall be forever done away with. The Christian sects have always maintained that all men, however unequal in education and intelligence, are equal before God, that divine truth is accessible to everyone. Jesus has even declared it to be the will of God that what is concealed from the wise shall be revealed to the simple. Not everyone is able to understand the mysteries of dogmatics, homiletics, liturgics, hermeneutics, apologetics. But everyone is able and ought to understand what Jesus Christ said to the millions of simple and ignorant people who have lived and who are living today. Now, the things that Jesus said to simple people who could not avail themselves of the comments of Paul, of Clement, of Chrysostom, and of others, are just what I did not understand, and which, now that I have come to understand them, I wish to make plain to all. The thief on the cross believed in the Christ and was saved. If the thief, instead of dying on the cross, had descended from it and told all men of his belief in the Christ, would not the result have been of great good? Like the thief on the cross, I believe in the doctrine of Jesus, and this belief has made me whole. This is not a vain comparison, but a truthful expression of my spiritual condition. My soul, once filled with despair of life and fear of death, is now full of happiness and peace. Like the thief, I knew that my past and present life was vile. I saw that the majority of men about me lived unworthy lives. I knew, like the thief, that I was wretched and suffering, that all those about me suffered and were wretched, and I saw before me nothing but death to save me from this condition. As the thief was nailed to his cross, so I was nailed to a life of suffering and evil by an incomprehensible power. And as the thief saw before him, after the sufferings of a foolish life, the horrible shadows of death, so I beheld the same vista opening before me. In all this, I felt that I was like the thief. There was, however, a difference in our conditions. He was about to die, and I still lived. The dying thief thought perhaps to find his salvation beyond the grave, while I had before me life and its mystery this side the grave. I understood nothing of this life. It seemed to me a frightful thing. And then I understood the words of Jesus, and life and death ceased to be evil. Instead of despair, I tasted joy and happiness that death could not take away. Will anyone then be offended if I tell the story of how all this came about? Leo Tolstoy. Moscow, January 22nd, 1884. Chapter 1. I shall explain elsewhere, in 2 voluminous treatises, why I did not understand the doctrine of Jesus, and how at length it became clear to me. These works are a criticism of dogmatic theology and a new translation of the four Gospels, followed by a concordance. In these writings, I seek methodically to disentangle everything that tends to conceal the truth from men. I translate the four Gospels anew, verse by verse, and I bring them together in a new concordance. The work has lasted for 6 years. Each year, each month, I discover new meanings which corroborate the fundamental idea. I correct the errors which have crept in, and I put the last touches to what I have already written. My life, whose final term is not far distant, will doubtless end before I have finished my work. But I am convinced that the work will be of great service, so I shall do all that I can to bring it to completion. I do not now concern myself with this outward work upon theology and the Gospels, but with an inner work of an entirely different nature. I have to do now with nothing systematic or methodical, only with that sudden light which showed me the gospel doctrine in all its simple beauty. The process was something similar to that experienced by one who, following an erroneous model, seeks to restore a statue from broken bits of marble, and who, with one of the most refractory fragments in hand, perceives the hopelessness of his ideal. Then he begins anew, and instead of the former incongruities he finds, as he observes the outlines of each fragment, that all fit well together and form one consistent whole. That is exactly what happened to me, and is what I wish to relate. I wish to tell how I found the key to the true meaning of the doctrine of Jesus, and how by this meaning doubt was absolutely driven from my soul. The discovery came about in this way. From my childhood, from the time I first began to read the New Testament, I was touched most of all by that portion of the doctrine of Jesus which inculcates love, humility, self-denial, and the duty of returning good for evil. This, to me, has always been the substance of Christianity. My heart recognized its truth in spite of skepticism and despair, and for this reason I submitted to a religion professed by a multitude of toilers who find in it the solution of life, the religion taught by the Orthodox Church. But in making my submission to the Church, I soon saw that I should not find in its creed the confirmation of the essence of Christianity. What was to me essential seemed to be in the dogma of the Church, merely an accessory. What was to me the most important of the teachings of Jesus was not so regarded by the Church. No doubt, I thought, the Church sees in Christianity, aside from its inner meaning of love, humility, and self-denial, an outer, dogmatic meaning, which, however strange and even repulsive to me, is not in itself evil or pernicious. But the further I went on in submission to the doctrine of the Church, the more clearly I saw in this particular point something of greater importance than I had at first realized. What I found most repulsive in the doctrine of the Church was the strangeness of its dogmas and the approval, nay, the support, which it gave to persecutions, to the death penalty, to wars stirred up by the intolerance common to all sects. But my faith was chiefly shattered by the indifference of the Church to what seemed to me essential in the teachings of Jesus and its partiality. For what seemed to me of secondary importance, I felt that something was wrong, but I could not see where the fault lay, because the doctrine of the Church did not deny what seemed to me essential in the doctrine of Jesus. This essential was fully recognized, yet in such a way as not to give it the first place. I could not accuse the Church of denying the essence of the doctrine of Jesus, but it was recognized in a way which did not satisfy me. The Church did not give me what I expected from her. I had passed from nihilism to the Church simply because I felt it to be impossible to live without religion, that is, without a knowledge of good and evil aside from animal instincts. I hoped to find this knowledge in Christianity, but Christianity I then saw only as a vague spiritual tendency from which it was impossible to deduce any clear and peremptory rules for the guidance of life. These I sought, and these I demanded of the Church. The Church offered me rules wherein I not only sought in vain the practice of the Christian life so dear to me, but which drove me still further away. I could not become a disciple of the Church. An existence based upon Christian truth was to me indispensable. and the church only offered me rules completely at variance with the truth that I loved. The rules of the church touching articles of faith, dogmas, the observance of the sacrament, fasts, prayers, were not necessary to me, and did not seem to be based on Christian truth. Moreover, the rules of the church weakened and sometimes destroyed the Christian disposition of soul which alone gave meaning to my life. I was troubled most that the miseries of humanity, the habit of judging one another, of passing judgment upon nations and religions, and the wars and massacres which resulted in consequence, all went on with the approbation of the church. The doctrine of Jesus, judge not, be humble, forgive offences, deny self, love, this doctrine was extolled by the church in words, but at the same time the church approved what was incompatible with the doctrine. Was it possible that the doctrine of Jesus admitted of such contradiction? I could not believe so. Another astonishing thing about the church was that the passages upon which it based affirmation of its dogmas were those which were most obscure. On the other hand, the passages from which came the moral laws were the most clear and precise. And yet the dogmas and the duties depending upon them were definitely formulated by the church, while the recommendation to obey the moral law was put in the most vague and mystical terms. Was this the intention of Jesus? The Gospels alone could dissipate my doubts. I read them once and again. Of all the other portions of the Gospels, the Sermon on the Mount always had for me an exceptional importance. I now read it more frequently than ever. Nowhere does Jesus speak with greater solemnity, nowhere does he propound moral rules more definitely and practically, nor do these rules in any other form awaken more readily an echo in the human heart. Nowhere else does he address himself to a larger multitude of the common people. If there are any clear and precise Christian principles, one ought to find them here. I therefore sought the solution of my doubts in Matthew 5, 6, and 7, comprising the Sermon on the Mount. These chapters I read very often, each time with the same emotional ardor as I came to the verses which exhort the hearer to turn the other cheek, to give up his cloak, to be at peace with all the world, to love his enemies, but each time with the same disappointment. The divine words were not clear. They exhorted to a renunciation so absolute as to entirely stifle life as I understood it. To renounce everything, therefore, could not, it seemed to me, be essential to salvation. And the moment this ceased to be an absolute condition, clearness and precision were at an end. I read not only the Sermon on the Mount, I read all the Gospels and all the theological commentaries on the Gospels. I was not satisfied with the declarations of the theologians that the Sermon on the Mount was only an indication of the degree of perfection to which man should aspire. That man, weighed down by sin, could not reach such an ideal, and that the salvation of humanity was in faith and prayer and grace. I could not admit the truth of these propositions. It seemed to me a strange thing that Jesus should propound rules so clear and admirable, addressed to the understanding of everyone, and still realize man's inability to carry his doctrine into practice. Then, as I read these maxims, I was permeated with the joyous assurance that I might that very hour, that very moment, begin to practice them. The burning desire I felt led me to the attempt, but the doctrine of the church rang in my ears. Man is weak, and to this he cannot attain. My strength soon failed. On every side I heard, you must believe and pray, but my wavering faith impeded prayer. Again I heard, you must pray, and God will give you faith. This faith will inspire prayer, which in turn will invoke faith that will inspire more prayer, and so on, indefinitely. Reason and experience alike convinced me that such methods were useless. It seemed to me that the only true way was for me to try to follow the doctrine of Jesus. And so, after all this fruitless search and careful meditation over all that had been written for and against the divinity of the doctrine of Jesus, after all this doubt and suffering, I came back face to face with the mysterious gospel message. I could not find the meanings that others found, neither could I discover what I sought. It was only after I had rejected the interpretations of the wise critics and theologians, according to the words of Jesus, "Except ye become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven." Matthew 18, verse 3. It was only then that I suddenly understood what had been so meaningless before. I understood not through exegetical fantasies or profound and ingenious textual combinations. I understood everything because I put all commentaries out of my mind. This was the passage that gave me the key to the whole. Ye have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you that ye resist not evil. Matthew, verses 38, 39. One day the exact and simple meaning of these words came to me. I understood that Jesus meant neither more nor less than what he said. What I saw was nothing new. Only the veil that had hidden the truth from me fell away, and the truth was revealed in all its grandeur. Ye have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you, that ye resist not evil. These words suddenly appeared to me as if I had never read them before. Always before, when I had read this passage, I had, singularly enough, allowed certain words to escape me. But I say unto you, that ye resist not evil. To me, it had always been as if the words just quoted had never existed, or had never possessed a definite meaning. Later on, as I talked with many Christians familiar with the gospel, I noticed frequently the same blindness with regard to these words. No one remembered them, and often, in speaking of this passage, Christians took up the gospel to see for themselves if the words were really there. Through a similar neglect of these words, I had failed to understand the words that follow. But whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also, etc. Matthew, verse 39. Always these words had seemed to me to demand long-suffering and privation contrary to human nature. They touched me. I felt that it would be noble to follow them, but I also felt that I had not the strength to put them into practice. I said to myself, if I turn the other cheek, I shall get another blow. If I give, all that I have will be taken away. Life would be an impossibility. Since life is given to me, why should I deprive myself of it? Jesus cannot demand as much as that. Thus I reasoned, persuaded that Jesus, in exalting long-suffering and privation, made use of exaggerated terms lacking in clearness and precision. But when I understood the words, resist not evil, I saw that Jesus did not exaggerate, that he did not demand suffering for suffering, but that he had formulated with great clearness and precision exactly what he wished to say. Resist not evil, knowing that you will meet with those who, when they have struck you on one cheek and met with no resistance, will strike you on the other, who, having taken away your coat, will take away your cloak also, who, having profited by your labor, will force you to labor still more without reward. And yet, though all this should happen to you, resist not evil. Do good to them that injure you. When I understood these words as they are written, all that had been obscure became clear to me, and what had seemed exaggerated I saw to be perfectly reasonable. For the first time I grasped the pivotal idea in the words, resist not evil. I saw that what followed was only a development of this command. I saw that Jesus did not exhort us to turn the other cheek that we might endure suffering, but that his exhortation was, resist not evil, and that he afterward declared suffering to be the possible consequence of the practice of this maxim. A father, when his son is about to set out on a far journey, commands him not to tarry by the way. He does not tell him to pass his nights without shelter, to deprive himself of food, to expose himself to rain and cold. He says, go thy way, and tarry not, though thou shouldst be wet or cold. So Jesus does not say, turn the other cheek and suffer. He says, resist not evil. No matter what happens, resist not. These words, resist not evil, when I understood their significance, were to me the key that opened all the rest. Then I was astonished that I had failed to comprehend words so clear and precise. Ye have heard that it hath been said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you, that ye resist not evil. Whatever injury the evil-disposed may inflict upon you, bear it. Give all that you have, but resist not. Could anything be more clear, more definite, more intelligible than that? I had only to grasp the simple and exact meaning of these words, just as they were spoken, when the whole doctrine of Jesus, not only as set forth in the Sermon on the Mount, but in the entire Gospels, became clear to me. What had seemed contradictory was now in harmony. Above all, what had seemed superfluous was now indispensable. Each portion fell into harmonious unison and filled its proper part, like the fragments of a broken statue when adjusted in harmony with the sculptor's design. In the Sermon on the Mount, as well as throughout the whole Gospel, I found everywhere affirmation of the same doctrine: resist not evil. In the Sermon on the Mount, as well as in many other places, Jesus represents his disciples, those who observe the rule of non-resistance to evil, as turning the other cheek, giving up their cloaks, persecuted, used despitefully, and in want. Everywhere Jesus says that he who taketh not up his cross, he who does not renounce worldly advantage, he who is not ready to bear all the consequences of the commandment, resist not evil, cannot become his disciple. To his disciples, Jesus says, choose to be poor, bear all things without resistance to evil, even though you thereby bring upon yourself persecution, suffering, and death. Prepared to suffer death rather than resist evil, he reproved the resentment of Peter and died exhorting his followers not to resist and to remain always faithful to his doctrine. The early disciples observed this rule and passed their lives in misery and persecution without rendering evil for evil. It seems, then, that Jesus meant precisely what he said. We may declare the practice of such a rule to be very difficult. We may deny that he who follows it will find happiness. We may say with the unbelievers that Jesus was a dreamer, an idealist who propounded impracticable maxims. But it is impossible not to admit that he expressed in a manner at once clear and precise what he wished to say. That is, that according to his doctrine, a man must not resist evil, and consequently, that whoever adopts his doctrine will not resist evil. And yet neither believers nor unbelievers will admit this simple and clear interpretation of Jesus' words.